All right, welcome to the video lecture for Module 1. Like I said, I'm going to be recording the lectures as we go along so that, one, you guys can go back and look at them, as well as in order to have something leading up to the class. So we've already done lecture 1, or at least most of it. This is going to be a video for that. Lecture 2, you will probably get first before the video as well, but then moving forward, my goal is to have these videos out to you guys before we lecture in class so that you can review it prior to the class. Effectively, and I know I mentioned this in class, but I want to mention it here. My goal for this is that you will come to the lecture having watched the video, having seen the material, and then in the actual class, we can go through and get into the weeds of it, go into deeper detail on things, as well as answer any questions that might come up. So again, use this as a reference in conjunction with the slide presentation themselves to study in the future. Starting off, so the history of the study of the human body. So when we talk about anatomy and physiology, like I said in class, the idea that we're talking about here is the stuff and how the stuff works, right? So early students of the anatomy and physiology were mostly concerned with treating illness and injuries. It evolved out of a form of healthcare. These are our earliest forms of healers and doctors. It started out relying mostly on superstition and magic. If you've remember things like bloodletting or leeching. Those were methods of treating illness and injuries back before they really had a solid grasp on the science. It used to be thought that illnesses came from an imbalance in the human or spiritual ethers. Later, this was replaced with more experimentation that led to the use of herbs, natural chemicals to treat ailments, and then eventually evolved into true understanding of the body via dissection of cadavers. So going in, cutting humans open, and seeing what's inside and how it works. Techniques for accurate observations and performing experiments were, of course, developed. And Greek and Latin cultures are really who led the march that created the study of anatomy and physiology. So in antiquity, a lot of the terms that we utilize for anatomy and physiology were created. So Greek and Latin language is the basis of most of our terminology. And of course, as the scientific method evolved, we utilize that to understand information about the natural world, including how the body works. So anatomy, it's the study of the structure, right? It's the thing, the stuff, right? The morphology of the body and its form and organization. Physiology is really the study of function, how these things interact and how they work. So again, the anatomy is the what, the physiology is the how. Because they are related, they're studied together, and the functional role of the part that is the anatomy, or I'm sorry, is the physiology, is very dependent on the form of it, the morphology, so the anatomy. So often is the case, if you understand how the anatomy is shaped, you might be able to glean what the physiological function is, and vice versa. If you know the physiological function, you can start taking guesses at what the anatomy might look like. Anatomists rely mostly on observation and dissection. So again, it's the looking at the stuff. Well, physiologists employ more experimentation. It's understanding how it works together. It's generally regarded as the more complicated side of the coin. It's more common to discover, as a result, new information related to physiology than anatomy, because anatomy is mostly observational and seen as the stuff that we're looking at, where physiology is the more complex, how it functions. So again, function and form, right? So if we think of hearing, we think of the ears. The ear is the organ that helps funnel sound in so that we can hear. And if we look at the anatomy or morphology of the ear, we see it's kind of like a cone. I liken this in lecture to like a Greek amphitheater, right? It's designed to pull information in. So by looking at the morphology of the ear, we can determine that, yeah, physiologically, it probably functions to help with conveying sound or hearing. When we talk about levels of organization, I want you to think of two things. I want you to think of the chemical world and the biological world. The chemical world is the smaller world, right? All materials, living and non living, are composed of chemicals. The human body, being the sum of its parts, can be studied by looking at the various levels of organizations. And when we start with chemicals, we're talking about the atoms, the molecules, the macromolecules. So the atom is the smallest unit of chemical, right? Atoms work together, bond to one another, and form molecules. So two or more atoms bonded together are your molecule. And then molecules can work together and form larger, more complex structures called macromolecules. Yeah. So these can be larger particles, small molecules. It's just molecules building together either in small numbers or very large numbers to form those macromolecules. Now, when we talk about the biology, the smallest unit to display all the characteristics of a living organism, and that's important, all the characteristics, right, are going to be the cell. Now, some organisms only consist of one cell. The human body obviously consists of trillions. In class, I talk about organelles. Organelles are the organs, effectively, of a cell. And while it is a smaller unit than the cell and composes a cell, it does not display all of the characteristics of life. So the cell is still that smallest unit that displays the characteristic of living organisms. So cell is our basic unit of structure in all living tissue, living things. Cells, like atoms, can work together and form larger colonies of cells that we call tissue. Those tissues can form larger organs that now start to perform very specialized functions. And then organs work together with other organs and tissues to form larger, more complex functions. And we call those organ systems. Organ systems, of course, work together to keep the organism going. So multiple organ systems functioning together is your organism. So if we look at the chemical and the biological, we can see that the atom, beginning with our smallest unit of chemical, can bond with other atoms to form molecules. Molecules can bond together with other molecules to form macromolecules. Macromolecules do form together to construct the component parts of a cell, the organelles, the organs. That's not listed here, but in between macromolecule and cell, we have those organelles. Now, organelles work together to run a cell. A cell is the smallest unit of biological material, right? Then the cell works together in conjunction with other cells to form tissues. If we look at all those deeper lines here in the striations of this cardiac tissue, we can see the boundaries of those various cells. The tissue works together to form the organ. The organ works together with other organs to form a system, and the systems work together to form the organism. So here we have an atom forming a molecule, macromolecule, then organelles would be in between, forming the cardiac cell. This cardiac cell forms cardiac tissue. Cardiac tissue forms the organ of the heart. The organ works within the circulatory system, and the circulatory system is a component part of the organism. When we talk about characteristics of life, these are the qualities or traits that are shared by all organisms. These are the things I want you to think of as being important to function. Yeah, all living things in order to exist have to do these four things. And that is growth, which self-explanatory, increase the body size and the number of cells. Not just the number of cells, but the size of the cells as well. Reproduction, right? It is our biological manifest destiny to want to reproduce, to continue whatever species we're talking about. So it's the production of new organisms and cells. And then responsiveness. It's the reaction to internal and external change. Responsiveness is where our homeostasis comes into play, and we'll talk about that later. And then finally, movement, the ability to change position of a body or body part, or the motion of an internal organ. So, if we think of the lungs perform movement, right? It doesn't just have to be the organism moving its body part. So again, growth, reproduction, responsiveness, movement. You got to be able to mature and develop, that's growth. We have to be able to create new organisms, that's reproduction. We have to be able to react to internal and external change, else we would die. That's responsiveness. And we have to be able to move, and that's movement. Now, when we look at things like metabolism, this is one of our characteristics of life that we call nutrient cycling. So metabolism is very simply the sum of all chemical reactions going on in the cell of an organism as it ingests foods, breaks down and synthesizes chemicals, and removes waste. So metabolism is our chemical reaction, yeah? We ingest food, we break it down. From that component part, we build and synthesize the chemicals we need to do the things we want to do, and then the byproducts are the waste we get rid of. So in order to perform metabolism, we have to do a couple of other tasks, and that's respiration, digestion, circulation, and excretion, right? When we talk about respiration, it's the release of energy from food by using oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide. We're specifically talking about humans in this regard. So we have to be able to breathe. We take in the oxygen, then we breathe out carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is the waste component. So that's how we bring in the air that we need in the body. Digestion, we bring in the physical food into the body, right? And then we break it down. It's absorbed into our tissues in our blood and our blood. Circulation is the movement of cells and chemicals in bodily fluids, and excretion is the removal of that metabolic waste. So again, we respire and we digest, so we're bringing something into the system that we need. We're breaking it down, using it to synthesize things, absorb things, basically using that to fuel us. It then uses circulation to move the things that we create around the body to the tissues that need it. And then what's left over is the waste. So that's excreted from the body. We're talking about maintaining life. We're talking about needing a couple of things. So requirements for organisms to maintain life, these are environmental factors needed by all organisms to remain alive. Yeah. So water is the most abundant chemical in the human body, right? 98% of the human body is composed of water. It is immensely important to our living. It's required for many metabolic processes. Water effectively, without getting too much into the weeds of the chemical reactions, water is effectively the thing that holds energy, stores energy, moves it around. Water is something that's used to break bonds, form bonds in our bodies. So it's required for so many of our metabolic processes to stay alive. That's why so much of our body is water. It provides the environment for internal processes. When we talk about extracellular and intercellular fluids, right, water is a massive component part of that. And as such, it's our transport medium. Water carries things, yeah? It regulates our body temperature. I talked about in class how because of the anatomical structure of H2O, it has the ability to bond with energy, heat energy specifically. So sweat is a way we regulate our body temperature, and that's because water can hold a lot of heat. And so if we secrete water from the body, we can burn off heat and bring our temperature down. And like I said a moment ago, it makes up our intercellular, extracellular fluid. So water is a very important component of life. Other chemicals, oxygen and carbon dioxide are huge for humans. Oxygen is obviously what we use to, it's what we breathe in, and then in our mitochondria, oxygen is very important for energy creation and synthesis, yeah? And the byproduct is the carbon dioxide that we exchange with the environment. So oxygen is used to release energy from food. Carbon dioxide is the waste after we break down the food that we expel out. Food or nutrients enter the body to supply the body and bodily processes, right? So we eat food, we break it down, we convert that into energy, we excrete the physical waste. So wastes are excreted from the body. So again, we're talking about respiration, digestion, circulation, and excretion when we're talking about these other chemicals. Let's look at intracellular and extracellular real quick. So intracellular, extracellular, it's our Latin terms, right? It means inside and outside of. So when we're talking about the cell, everything that is inside the cell is intracellular. We have intracellular fluid, and then we have, of course, the organelles. So the intracellular fluid which is vaguely pictured in this diagram up here. That's the fluid, right? A lot of that fluid is water. And it is the fluid that everything kind of swims in within the cell. The organelles are in there, the nucleus, all of that. Everything outside of the cell is extracellular. Yeah. So when we're talking about a blood vessel, which we're looking at here, we can see that this is our cell. The blood plasma, which is some of the fluid that is in the artery here, is going to be extracellular fluid. The white blood cell here is going to be an extracellular cell compared to the red blood cell, but in and of itself is also a cell, which has its own intracellular fluid, right? And then when we talk about fluid outside of the blood vessel, this interstitial fluid, right? This is the fluid that is not in the vessel itself, but again, because it's outside the cell, we call it extracellular fluid, right? So again, intracellular, extracellular, very simple concepts. If it's in the cell, it's intracellular. If it's outside the cell, it's extracellular. Yeah? Whether it's blood plasma or interstitial tissue, that's out of the cell, therefore it's extracellular. The next two requirements for organisms to maintain life is heat and pressure. So heat, yeah, it's a form of energy produced in metabolic reactions. Temperature controls reactions rates in the body, right? So heat is very important, not only as a form of energy, but as a regulator. When we talk about enzymatic reactions in our body where enzymes are doing work, temperature is often the rate limiting factor. So if it's really hot, it tends to speed up reactions in our body unless it gets too hot, in which case it breaks things down and melts them. And if it gets cold, it tends to slow things down or ultimately stop them altogether. Both radicals and heat can cause death, but temperature is kind of our regulator. So temperature controls the reaction rates, yeah? And again, it's a form of energy. In metabolic reactions, when we break bonds, we release heat, yeah? So we gain energy. Pressure. So it's the force applied to something, yeah? Atmospheric pressure is needed for breathing. Yeah, if we were in a vacuum, we would not be able to create the suction when we breathe, so we would not be able to breathe. That's why I can't breathe in space. There's also hydrostatic pressure. This is specifically fluid pressure, and that's what's needed to move blood through the vessels, deliver oxygen, nutrients to the cell. So our hydrostatic pressure in our circulatory system would be controlled by what? It'd be the heart. The heart is the pumping organ that creates that hydrostatic pressure. And that is our blood pressure specifically. And the blood, because it carries nutrients and oxygen around the body to deliver those nutrients, needs to be moving. So that heart rate needs to be maintaining, a certain rate depending on how much energy is needed. Obviously, if we need a lot of energy, if we're exercising, the heart rate increases, blood pressure increases to get the blood fluid circulating faster, right? So heat, pressure, water, other chemicals, these are the requirements for life. And all of this is done to work towards homeostasis, right? So homeostasis is the perfect environment balance between internal and external factors that your body prefers to be at. So when factors in the external environment, your outside world, change, conditions in the internal environment, the fluid in the body, around the body cells, have to remain stable. So homeostasis is the body's mechanisms by which it remains stable, right? Homeostasis is regulated through control systems called homeostatic mechanisms. So what this is to say is there are effectively three parts of our homeostasis system, right? So we have receptors, we have a set point, and we have an effector. So our receptor is what detects and monitors for specific types of changes. So the receptor, when a change happens in our external environment, the receptor is what notices that change. It then sends a signal to the set point, yeah? And that set point is what is the storage space for our normal value or range of values, right? And then the effector is what is so the set point communicates with the effector, which are our muscles and glands, and that responds to the change to return the environment back to normal. So in an example, if it's cold outside, the receptors are going to detect that drop in temperature and send a signal up to the brain. The brain is going to say, oh, our body temperature is getting lower than the value that we want, about 98.6 degrees. So I'm going to now tell the effectors, the muscles and the sweat glands, to respond in such a way that allows our temperature to increase. Now, if the temperature is going down, the receptor tells the brain, hey, the temperature is going down. The brain says, well, we don't like it when it's much lower than 98.6 degrees. So muscles, I need you to start rapidly contracting. We call these shivers. And when the muscles rapidly contract, that creates heat. And that increases the temperature back up to that 98.6 degrees. Additionally, the brain will also tell the vascular system to contract so that the blood flow stays more towards the trunk and less towards the extremities. That will heat us up faster, as well as tell the sweat glands, don't sweat, because sweat secretes water. Water holds energy in the form of heat. And so if we sweat, we lose heat, we lose energy, and we get colder. So the effector glands will be told, don't sweat. And so as a result, cold temperature will result in the body receiving, the receptors noticing the cold change, the brain then saying we don't like to be that cold, so the effectors do things to heat us up. Homeostatic mechanisms are self-regulating control system that the body uses to maintain homeostasis. So we aren't consciously choosing to do things. It happens naturally. Our body functions in such a way that it maintains homeostasis largely on its own. So the body functions properly only when heat, pressure, concentrations of water, nutrients, oxygen remain within their very specific ranges. We don't want too much or too little water, too much or too little nutrients, too much or too little oxygen, pressure, heat. We like those things regulated. Yeah. So again, the example I used was the regulation of body temperature, right? So when the body temperature starts to go down due to external drop in temperature, the blood vessels will constrict, the heart rate will start to increase, and the sweat glands will start to turn off. We will start to shiver, and we will cause our muscles to shake, releasing heat to bring that back up to a homeostatic temperature, right? So in this example, the regulation of blood pressure occurs via pressure-sensitive receptors and the muscle cells in the blood vessels, yeah? So again, let's break down the receptors, set point, and effectors more specifically in this example, yeah? So receptors are the structures that monitor deviation from a set point. So if my body temperature wants to be 98.6 degrees, these receptors are designed to detect any changes from that. They then provide information about this change or the stimuli to in the internal environment. So it detects the drop in temperature, making it cold. That's the stimuli. The receptors are what detect the drop in cold. Yeah, so the stimuli is the drop in cold. The receptors detect it. It then sends a signal to the brain. The brain's normal value for temperature in this example is 98.6 degrees, 37 degrees Celsius. Yeah. That set point detects, hey, we're lower than 98.6 degrees, so I'm going to send a signal to the effectors. Yeah. Muscle cells are glands that bring change necessary to bring the variable back to the normal range. So again, just to beat it over the head, the stimuli is it's cold outside. A change occurs in the internal environment. The stimuli of it being cold outside is now dropping the temperature inside the body. The thermoreceptors, your temperature receptors, detect that. It then sends a signal up to the control center or the set point, which is the brain, and says, hey, brain, we are now reaching 96.5 degrees. The brain says, well, we like 98.6 degrees, right? So now we're going to tell again, the muscles contract, the sweat glands shut off, the blood vessels contract. This traps in more blood into the center mass of the body, increasing heat. The shaking muscles cause shivering. That increases heat through vibration, and the sweat glands stop secreting water, so we hold on to the residual heat. This produces an increased temperature inside the body back to 98.6 degrees, which is our response. The change is corrected. The negative feedback system is the mechanism by which a deviation in the variable from its set point is corrected. So, if it's cold outside, receptors tell the brain, hey, it's cold. The brain says, hey, make it hotter. The muscles, the glands, the vessels are going to do things to make it hotter. But if that just continued on without any check, you would just continue to heat up over and over again until you died of heat. Negative feedback is what stops that. So negative feedback is the mechanism by which the deviation from a variable is corrected. It's used in most homeostatic mechanisms. So when receptors detect a variable has deviated from its set point, the effectors return the condition back to normal. As the variable returns back towards its set point, the activity of the effectors gradually lessen. This prevents the correction from progressing too far. So again, if I'm heating up because my glands are not secreting sweat, my vascular system is not allowing for as much blood profusion to the extremities, and it's holding it in the trunk where it increases heat, and my muscles are shaking and shivering to produce heat. If they continue to do that forever, I'm just going to keep heating up. So the body's negative feedback system is, okay, we're back to 98 degrees. We're back to 98.3 degrees. We're back to 98.5 degrees. As we're returning back to that 98.6 degrees, the set point is telling those effectors, okay, don't shake as much now. Okay, don't constrict the vessels as much. Okay, sweat glands, you can start to sweat a little bit if we need to. Until eventually it tells the effectors, hey, don't shake anymore. Blood vessels don't contract anymore. Sweat glands don't resist anymore if you need to. Yeah, so it's the shutoff valve that prevents us from an overcorrection. That is the negative feedback system. As we return to normal, the negative feedback system will slowly stop the effectors that are returning it to normal so that it stops on normal. It doesn't go too far the other way. This is a thermostat example. I like the temperature in the body example, but it's the same concept, right? Room cools down. Thermostat detects the change. It tells the furnace to turn on. Furnace produces heat. The temperature in the room increases. The thermostat shuts the furnace off. Shutting the furnace off is our negative feedback, so it doesn't become too hot in the room. Now, negative feedback isn't always perfect, however, right? Like if the furnace turns off and it gets cold again, okay, now it's going to turn back on and reset the whole process. Negative feedback just stops it from overcorrecting. Homeostasis is a constant tug of war. Yeah, we're never truly at homeostasis. We're always fighting to live in and around homeostasis. So this is the exact example I use, right? Thermoreceptors. Thermo is heat or temperature, and a receptor, so temperature receptors, yeah? So when the environment gets cold, thermoreceptors detect the drop in the body temperature. Thermoreceptors send a signal to the control center in the brain, the hypothalamus specifically. Blood vessels in the skin contract. This prevents the loss of heat through skin, and it also prevents less blood flow prevents blood flow to the extremities in the usual amount, which keeps it into the trunk, which increases heat as well. Certain muscles are caused to contract involuntarily, causing shivering, produces body heat. Sweat glands are inactivated. The body is warm and the temperature returns to normal. The negative feedback here is that as the body returns to temperature, again, the shivering lessens, the blood vessel constriction loosens, and the sweat glands activate. And it's just the exact opposite. What if the opposite happened? There's an increase in temperature in the external environment. Thermal detectors detect a rise in the body temperature. Thermal receptors send the nerve signal to the brain saying, hey, it's 98.8 degrees. We don't like that. Sweat glands are then activated to secrete water, which is holding on to heat, so secreting heat. This cools the skin. The heart rate is increased to send more blood to the surface. That again increases sweating, so it gets rid of heat. Superficial blood vessels dilate to again create more heat and sweat loss to the external environment, breathing rate is increased so that we can allow expiration of more heat containing air. The air inside of us becomes hotter, and so we breathe more to push it out. Again, this all lowers lowers the temperature. The negative feedback is our heart rate slows down, our breathing decreases, the surface blood vessels start to constrict a little bit, yeah? Sweat glands deactivate. So when we talk about organ systems related to homeostasis, every organ system is doing something related to homeostasis, yeah? So they contribute to homeostasis in a variety of ways. The digestive system brings nutrients into the body, separates the nutrients from the waste, yeah? Then we have the respiratory system, brings oxygen into the body, gets rid of its waste through carbon dioxide. We have the cardiovascular system, which takes the nutrients from our digested food, takes the oxygen from our respired air, and it circulates it around the body, transporting it to all the sites that need it. Your liver cells need nutrients. It needs oxygen. Well, the blood system, the circulatory system, brings the blood, washes it through the liver, and so the liver gets to absorb those nutrients and oxygen. Then the urinary system, as well as the respiratory system, removes waste from the body. Yeah, so we breathe in oxygen, we create the waste carbon dioxide, we breathe out carbon dioxide. That is both our intake and waste management system for breathing. Digestion brings in food, breaks it down into its component parts. We absorb the nutrients. The rest gets taken out through the urinary system where it is excreted from the body. Cardiovascular system is the middleman, taking that oxygen and nutrients and washing it through the body so that everyone gets some of those nutrients and oxygen. Yeah, so a good representation of homeostasis, yeah? We take nutrients in, salts, water, we break it down, we absorb it, and then anything that we don't need, we pass along through the system. Those nutrients then go into the blood. The unabsorbed matter eventually will also go into the blood, will go out of the body, or some of it goes into the blood to be secreted through the kidneys. The urinary system, yeah. The heart is pumping either more or less depending on how much nutrients we need. If we have too much, it'll go slower. If we have too little, it'll go faster. The lungs bring in oxygen, push out carbon dioxide. That oxygen, along with these nutrients, circulate through the blood, go into the organs, supplying them until it runs through the kidneys' urinary system where it's excreted as waste. All right, positive feedback systems, a little bit different from negative feedback systems, but they really only come up in two ways that we talk about. It's not a common type of homeostatic mechanism, so I just want you to kind of learn these two specific examples. But before that, a positive feedback mechanism is a mechanism by which a deviation from a variable, in a variable form from its set point, Let me try that again. A mechanism by which a deviation in a variable form from its set point moves conditions further away from the normal range. That is such a convoluted way of saying it, but effectively it's this. Where negative feedback systems slow down the effectors as it returns to normal, positive feedback systems take us away from normal. So it's a change from the set point that increases. So it doesn't decrease the process that's happening. So it doesn't slow down our temperature rise until it lands on 98.6 degrees. It increases the set point's change away from it. So they produce unstable conditions in the body that are short-lived, but ultimately are designed to bring about homeostasis. The two examples here that will make sense are blood clotting and childbirth. So when we talk about blood clotting, if we have a cut in tissue, right, we increase blood flow to that tissue. Now, even though that means a loss of blood, if I cut my skin and it's bleeding, you might think the homeostatic mechanism is stop bleeding, stop the blood flow because I don't want to lose the blood. But if we did that, the cut would still be there and now nutrients wouldn't be flowing. So instead, we have this positive feedback mechanism where when there is a cut, we actually bleed more because we send platelets at the blood. Or at the cut, and those platelets form a clot. And once that clot it keeps clotting until the blood flow is contained again, and we're not losing blood to the external environment via the cut. So we're going further away from homeostasis by increasing bleeding to an area that's damaged, because we're ultimately creating a clot to stop the loss of blood, which does ultimately bring us back to homeostasis of having the right level of blood in the body and not losing it outside of the body. Same with childbirth. Uterine contractions during childbirth stimulate more uterine contractions, which ultimately push the baby out, which again is homeostasis. We're returning to our natural state of not wanting the baby in our body giving birth. So we increase our uterine contractions to push this, what the body sees as the foreign body, the baby, out of the body, thus returning us to homeostasis. When it comes to positive feedback mechanisms, I really just want you to know blood clotting and childbirth are the two examples. It is not common. Most homeostatic mechanisms in the body are a negative feedback mechanism. Positive feedback is very, very few and far between. Blood clotting, childbirth, those are the big examples. Okay. This brings us to now what we were talking about during our first class, starting to look at cavities, starting to look at how things are broken down organizationally in the body. So to start, two big important terms that I want you to know is axial and appendicular. Axial is going to be the center points of the body, yeah? If you draw a line from the head to the pelvis, that is your axial portion of the body. It's your head, your neck, your trunk. If I was talking about your axial skeleton, that would be your skull and your spine. Yeah, it would be all the way down to the tailbone. Appendicular are your limbs. Yeah, upper and lower limbs. Very simple. Axial, that's the center point. Appendicular, that's your limbs. So the appendicular skeleton would be arms and legs. The axial portion contains several of our body's cavities, yeah, and organs. So we have the cranial cavity, houses the brain, of course. The brain becomes the spinal cord. So the cranial cavity empties into the vertebral cavity. From a organ standpoint, we have the thoracic cavity, right, which is the heart, the lungs, the mediastinum. Remember, median is in the center. Sternum is a bone in the center. So think median sternum, mediastinum kind of is how you should remember it. We have the abdominopelvic cavity, which is a cavity composed of two additional cavities, the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity, so abdominopelvic cavity. In the abdominal cavity, of course, we have the majority of our visceral organs, so that's our stomach, liver, spleen, gallbladder, kidneys, most of the intestines. The pelvic cavity is the end of the large intestines, the urinary bladder, and the biggest one, the reproductive system, yeah. Remember that the thoracic cavity and the abdominopelvic cavity is divided by a physical border. And this is a broad, thin muscle called the diaphragm. It separates the thoracic and abdominopelvic cavities. Remember, the abdominopelvic cavity does not have a biological border within itself. So the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity, it's an imaginary border. There is a physical border, the diaphragm, between the thoracic cavity and the abdominopelvic cavity. And we can see that illustrated here. Now, when we're talking about the thoracic cavity, there are three components to it. There is the left and right pleural cavity. Remember, pleural is a Latin term which means lungs. We have the mediastinum. The mediastinum is in the center. The pleural cavities are on the side. You can call it the mediastinum cavity, but most people drop the cavity and just say mediastinum. So pleural cavities contain the lungs. The mediastinum contains the esophagus, the trachea, the heart is the main organ, yeah. Then we have the physical diaphragm, and then we have the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity illustrated here. And you can see there clearly there is no physical border between abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. Talking about the small cavities of the head, we have the oral cavity, right? This houses the contents of the mouth. So the tongue, the teeth, yeah. The nasal cavity is inside our nose. It is divided into the left and right portions by the nasal septum. So in between our nostrils, we have that piece of tissue. That is the nasal septum. It contains our sinuses. Remember, we have our maxillary sinus, which is in our cheeks. We have our frontal sinus, which is in our forehead. Orbital cavity. So this contains our eyes along with the nerves and the skeletal muscles that move the eyes and blink the eyelids. The orbital cavity is composed of multiple bones. The middle ear cavity contains the ear bones. So if we think of our ear, what we call the auricular surface is the physical skin and cartilage of our external ear. That is the amphitheater that pulls the sound into the middle ear, which is where our tympanic membrane is, or our eardrum. And it really is a drum, and it contains 3 small ear bones. And those ear bones will bang on the tympanic membrane, the eardrum, to create sound. That sound is interpreted by the brain, and thus we hear. So middle ear cavity contains the middle ear, the ear canal, and the bones inside. We can visualize that here, yeah? So we have the cranial cavity, houses the brain. We have the frontal sinus. Maxillary sinus would be somewhere in here. They don't have it visualized. We have the orbital cavities, yes. We have the sphenoidal sinus, yeah. It contains our lacrimal ducts, that is our tear ducts. We have the nasal cavity, it's where we breathe in here. We have our oral cavity. Yeah, and then we have our middle ear. So outer ear is the tissue, and then it forms the inner ear. The inner ear, via the eustachian tube, also empties into these cavities, along with the sphenoidal sinuses, the orbital sinus, the maxillary sinus. They all empty right into these nasal cavities. Into the oral cavities comes air, food, and then they all empty into here. This would be our esophagus. This is where the food goes. This would be our trachea. Yeah. There will be the uvula in the throat, which as we swallow works to block the connecting point so that food does not go into the trachea. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about membranes. So membranes are what each organ is wrapped in. So every single organ in the body has a protective shielding called a membrane. Yeah, they exist in the thoracic and in the abdominal pelvic cavities. The cranial cavity doesn't have a membrane. The brain does have a protective layer. It's called the dura, but it's not a membrane like these are. So in the thoracic and in the abdominal pelvic cavities, we have our organs, and those organs are wrapped in this membrane. And I don't want you to think of it like a saran wrapping. I want you to think of it like it's 2 layered and it's filled with water. So it's a membrane. Think of a water balloon and think of a very stretchy water balloon. And if I hold the water balloon in one hand and I push down with one finger into the water balloon, that water balloon will begin to concave around my finger. Yeah. That is what an organ or visceral membrane is. It's a double layered membrane that surrounds organs and lines the cavities. So there are 2 portions, yeah? We have the parietal and the visceral. Understand that visceral is a term which means organ, effectively. Yeah, the visceral system is our organ system. So the part of the membrane that touches and covers the organ itself, that's the visceral portion of the membrane. The parietal portion is the part that lines the cavity. So if I have an organ like the lung, and I put that lung and I press it into this membrane, the part that envelops and wraps around the lung is the visceral portion. The part that touches the thoracic cavity walls is the parietal portion, yeah? Now, remember, because organs are called pleura, when we're talking about the membrane surrounding the lungs, it is a pleural membrane. Each type of organ has its own special name for the membrane. So let's go through that. So the pleural membranes line the thoracic cavity. The parietal pleura is the part that lines the wall of the thoracic cavity, while the visceral pleura covers the lungs itself. It's a thin layer of serous fluid that separates those two layers and is a potential space between layers in the pleural cavity. So what does all that mean? So we have our lung. It's wrapped in a membrane. The part of the membrane that touches the lung is our visceral pleura, because pleura is lung. Lung membrane is pleural membrane. The part that touches the thoracic cavity, the walls of that cavity, is the parietal pleura. The parietal pleura and the visceral pleura are separated by water. It's a water-filled balloon. And the reason it's separated, and it's not true water, it's serous fluid, but the reason that is it's a good shock absorber. See, this is designed to protect the lungs. If I get jostled, if I get into a car accident, now instead of the lung just bouncing around off of bone and muscle, this fluid-filled sac is what the organ is in, and that's bouncing around. The fluid is this medium that dulls the trauma to the area, so more force can be applied to the lungs without damaging the lungs. Now, because it is fluid filled, we call that a potential space. Yeah, we call that a potential space because there's fluid in there. That's where things like infections can get in. That's where things like foreign bodies, parasites can get in. So a potential space is just a space where things can happen. Yeah. So in that serous fluid that separates the parietal and visceral pleura is a potential space for activity. Yeah. When we talk about the heart, yeah, we call it a pericardial membrane. So cardial is heart. Yes, peri is the side of. So the side of the heart. Yeah, pericardial. It surrounds the heart. The parietal pericardium, therefore, is the outer layer that surrounds and touches the cavity that is the mediastinum, right? And the visceral pericardium covers the heart. The serous fluid, again, separates the two layers. And guess what? It's a potential space for pericardial cavity, yeah? So it, again, is a space where things can happen. Peritoneal, this is our abdominal pelvic cavity, yeah? Just remember the peritoneal membrane is our abdominal pelvic cavity. The parietal peritoneum, therefore, lines the wall of the abdominal pelvic cavity, and the visceral peritoneum lines and covers each of the organs. Guess what? There is a serous fluid between those layers, and that's a potential space for the parietal cavity where things can happen, yeah? So, again, the peritoneal membranes, they're very large because they cover all the intestines, they cover the liver, the spleen, the everything, yeah? So let's take a look at a cross section, okay? We have the lungs here. This is our pleural membrane. Yeah, it's the whole thing surrounding the lung. On the outside, it's touching the ribs, it's touching the muscle, it's touching the walls of the thoracic cavity, as well as the mediastinum. So that's our parietal membrane. The inside here that's touching the lungs is only touching the viscera, so that's the visceral cavity. The space in between is filled with serous fluid. That is our potential space. Same thing, here's the pericardial membrane. The outmost portion is contacting the mediastinum. It's also making contact with the parietal pleura. This is the parietal pericardium. The parts touching the heart itself is the visceral pericardium, serous fluid in the center. That's our our potential space. We go down into the abdominal pelvic cavity, and we can see this is our peritoneal membranes. Yeah, they're wrapping around all the organs here, right? Okay, we have the spleen, the pancreas, yes, we have the liver, the kidneys, we have the intestines. So when it's touching, again, the abdominal pelvic wall, we call it the parietal peritoneum, and when it's touching the organs, we call it the visceral peritoneum. There's serous fluid in here, and that is a potential space because you can see things can get in there, infections and other things. Let's talk about organ systems. So body consists of several organ systems. Each system contains a group of organs that work together to accomplish a specific function. Each system contributes to homeostasis through its specific functions. So the body covering, right? The integumentary system. This is our largest body system. It is the skin, hair, nails, sweat, and sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands are our oil-producing glands. They protect the underlying tissues, help to regulate body temperature, sense change via a variety of sensory receptors. Every organ system has sensory receptors, being that the integumentary system is the largest organ. This has the largest, most robust system of sensory receptors. And it synthesizes certain products, specifically the sebaceous glands, yeah? And it synthesizes hair, nail, and skin. Support and movement, yeah? So let's talk about skeletal and muscular system. These systems work together in tandem. They all work together in tandem for the organism's homeostasis, but these two systems, for obvious reasons, really work together a lot. Skeletal system consists of your bones, your ligaments, your cartilage. Remember, ligaments are the attachment point from bone to bone. They hold bones together. Cartilage is the shock absorber between bones, and bone is, well, the bone. When we're born, it's important to note that we don't have bones. We only have cartilage. Our body begins to ossify such that the cartilage expands, and then the earlier portion of that cartilage becomes bone. Then the cartilage expands, more of it becomes bone, until eventually the rate at which cartilage converts to bone is outpacing the rate at which the cartilage expands, and that becomes a full solid bone during development. It can take a long time. The sternum doesn't fully ossify until you're about 40 years old. So even if you're in your 30s, you do not have a totally bone skeleton yet. The skeletal system supports and protects soft tissues. It provides our framework, right? Yeah, it stores inorganic salts, yeah, and houses tissues that produce blood cells, yeah? Our bone marrow is what produces the blood cells. White and yellow marrow, red and yellow marrow produce the red and white blood cells respectively. The inorganic salts are the different salts like hydroxyapatite, which is the basically the salt that gives bone its rigid form. The muscular system, it consists of the muscles and the tendons. It doesn't include the tendons. Remember, tendons attach muscles to bone. It is the connecting force between these two systems. It provides the body with movement and posture. It is the major source of heat. Remember, muscle vibration through rapid contraction and release is called shivering. It produces a lot of heat, and because of how much muscle we have, we can generate major sources of heat with our muscles. When we exercise, what are we working out, right? Our muscles. That's why we get hot. So these work together. The muscles attached to the skeletal system via the tendons. It then creates motion. Body systems that provide integration and coordination. So we have the nervous system. Yeah, it consists of the brain, the spinal cord, the nerves, and sense organs. Sense organs are going to be things like Golgi tendon organs and muscles, where there is a neurologic connection that causes our reflexes. You don't really need to know that right now, but just understand that sense organs are neurological components of other organs that tell it to do things, generally without you having to think about it. But the main thing is on the axial side of things, we have the brain and spinal cord. And on the appendicular side of things, we have our spinal nerves. These travel out to our hands, our feet, and innervate those muscles. So cells communicate with each other and with muscles and glands via neurotransmitters. So this is very much just a more microscopic version of our receptor set point effector system. A neurotransmitter is a cell that the nervous system will send to a muscle that says, hey, contract. The muscle will then contract. Or, hey, release, and the muscle releases. A nerve cell function in either sensory reception, integration of incoming information, or stimulation of muscles and glands. So if I'm hurt, if someone pokes me with something sharp, that sensory information, right? So the nerve cell will fire a signal up to my brain going, ow, I didn't like that. Once it gets to the brain, it will it'll integrate the information and say, oh, we don't like pain. And then it might stimulate the muscle to pull your arm away from the thing that's poking you. That's an example of how those work, yeah? When we're talking about temperature regulation, of course, and sweating, we have the sensory reception that, oh, we don't like that the heat is getting increased, so we increase our sweat gland, right? So it sweats, it gets rid of heat. We have the endocrine system, yeah? This consists of all the glands that secrete chemical messengers called hormones. It includes the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the thyroid, parathyroid, pineal, thymus, the pancreas, the ovaries, the testes, along with other organs that secrete hormones. Yeah, hormones alter metabolism of specific target cells. Hormones are slower to respond than neurotransmitters, but they create effects that last longer. So yeah, our endocrine system is very complex. It is our hormonal system. Yeah. Together, these systems work similarly in that they will send some sort of transmitter that will relay information that will then cause something to happen. So in the case of the nervous system, it's a neurotransmitter. These are lightning fast. And then in the endocrine system, these are hormones. They take longer, but generally take on much larger effects that last longer periods of time. Talking about transport. So body systems that provide the transport of substances through the body is your cardiovascular system and your lymphatic system. So cardiovascular, of course, consists of the heart, the blood vessels, and the blood. It distributes oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, and hormones throughout the body while removing waste. So again, once we get the nutrients in the blood, once we get the oxygen in the blood, once the waste is in the blood, the cardiovascular system pushes it around the body so it goes where it's got to go. Oxygen, nutrients go to the tissues, the organs, and everything that needs repair, that needs upkeep, all of that. The waste gets sent to other organs that are going to now remove the waste, yeah? So the blood funnels through the kidneys, that gets turned into urine, yeah? The lymphatic system consists of our lymphatic vessels. These are our lymph nodes, our thymus, spleen, and the lymph, which is the fluid that flows through the lymphatic system. Think of lymph as the blood of the lymphatic system. This is our immune system in many ways. It drains excess tissue fluid and returns it to the bloodstream. Lymphocytes are a type of white blood cells used extensively in immunity, defends the body against infection. For the lymph system, I want you to know it's the immune system effectively, right? And it functions identically to the circulatory system. It has lymphatic vessels, it has nodes, it has organs that are all about cleaning the blood, getting rid of waste products of blood, draining things and returning back, like, how do I want to say it? Like filtering out blood and then returning it back to the system so it's clean. And then the lymphocytes are the white blood cells that travel around the body and fight infections. So the lymph system is, to the cardiovascular system, very similar, but it's more about immunity rather than about nutrient cycling. Finally, we have our absorption and excretion, right? So body that provide systems that provide absorption and excretion are a digestive system, respiratory system, and urinary system. Digestion consists of the mouth, the tongue, the teeth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, and intestines, accessory organs. It receives food, it breaks it down, it absorbs what it needs, it gets rid of the rest. Pretty simple. We eat the food, we put it in our mouth. Enzymes in our saliva break the food down, goes into our intestines and into our stomach. Sometimes our stomach absorbs the nutrients. Mostly it's our intestines. What is left over gets pushed down through the large intestines, then out through excretion. The respiratory system, that moves oxygen through the air, from the air into the lungs, right? It exchanges oxygen for carbon dioxide, which is the waste. And then we breathe it out. It consists of the lungs, the air passageways, the nasal cavity, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, all of those things. We bring the oxygen in. Oxygen goes through the reaction where we need it to form energy, supply tissue. It gets circulated in the blood. A waste product of carbon dioxide is created in the lungs and then pushed out through exhalation. The urinary system consists of the kidneys, the ureters, the bladder, and the urethra. So the kidney is the bean-shaped organ. The ureter is the tube that connects the kidney to the bladder. The bladder connects to the tube that is the urethra. The urethra then expels the urine. So it removes waste from blood and helps to maintain water and electrolyte balance. It produces, stores, and eliminates urine. So again, blood. We eat food, we digest, we absorb, we take those nutrients into the blood. Some of those nutrients become waste, cellular debris, after the spleen is done cleaning the blood and getting rid of waste. That waste funnels through the kidneys. The kidneys further purifies and takes more waste out. That concentrated waste is now dropped from the kidney through the ureters to empty into the bladder. Once the bladder hits a fill point, you get the urge to urinate. The bladder opens up, pushes the urine through the urethra and out the body. Reproduction. So reproductive system is our unique system because it differs based on the biological sex of the organism that we're talking about. So body systems that provide reproduction of new offspring is, of course, our reproductive system. It is different for biosex males and biosex females. In the biosex male, it consists, of course, of the testes, the scrotum, the epididymis, the ductus deferentia, seminal vesicles, prostate gland, bulbourethral glands, the penis, and urethra. Yes, the urethra is a part of the urinary system, but in the male reproductive system, the urethra doubles as a component part of the male reproductive system, of course, because it is also the means by which semen is ejected from the body as well. It produces and maintains the sperm. The epididymis specifically is what produces and nourishes the sperm, and can duct them to that's a weird way of saying it. Yes, and then conduct them to the female reproductive tract. Yes, so the scrotum is basically the protective bag that basically maintains temperature for the testes. The testes create the sperm. The epididymis creates the nutritional component. The vas deferens is what transports that then into the urethra, the prostate gland, the bulbourethral glands. Those are other kind of nourishing, secreting kind of glands. All of that mixes together, forms the semen that then leaves through the urethra, and in the case of active reproduction, enters into the female reproductive tract. Yeah. Female reproductive system consists of the ovaries, the uterine tubes, the uterus, vagina, clitoris, vulva. Produces female sex cells like the eggs and oocytes. Receives male sex cells for fertilization during active reproduction. Houses the developing offspring and functions in childbirth. I don't believe we're going to go into full child development and the whole pregnancy process in this class, but if we do, that'll be saved for later. We won't really go through that right now. But yeah, we have the ovaries, right? That houses the biosex female's eggs. We are born with eggs for organisms that become biosex male. At about 6 weeks, the body will reabsorb those eggs, and then around the time of puberty, the testes will start creating sperm. But in biosex females, we hold on to those eggs, and so you are born with those eggs. You don't develop them, unlike the male reproductive system, which reabsorbs those eggs at about 6 weeks of development as an embryo, and then creates sperm later in life. We're all born with eggs. The eggs and the ovaries are then traveled down through the uterine tubes into the uterus, and that is where the child develops, obviously. Yeah. Organ systems and their interaction for homeostasis is just a good map to show that, yes, they're all working together in order to establish homeostasis in the body. Okay. Now we're done with organ systems. Let's talk about our relational descriptors. We've already gone through this ad nauseum, so we're just going to kind of hit this real quick. So anatomical terminology, right? The anatomical position, I'm not going to use words. We've done it in class. We'll probably do it every class just to really cover it, but it's that standard natural position, in which case the orientation of the body is maximized for how the body prefers to move. When we talk about relationships with the body, yeah, we talk about superior and inferior. If we're talking about two things in relationship to one another, the thing that is above the other is superior. The thing that's below is inferior. The head is superior to the pelvis. The pelvis is inferior to the head. When we talk about anterior and posterior, we talk about the front and the back. If something's in front of you, it's anterior. If it's something behind you, it's posterior. Now, ventral and dorsal get used almost interchangeably with anterior and posterior, but really ventral is more effectively used as when it is on the front. Yeah, my nose is a ventral organ because it is on the front of me. Yeah, my nose is anterior to the back of my skull. Dorsal, much the same, right? My shoulder blade is a dorsal bone. My shoulder blade is posterior to my ribs. When we talk about medial and lateral, we're talking about its relationship to the midline. So if something is closer to the midline, we call it medial. If it is further from the midline, we call it lateral. So my fingers are lateral to my heart. My heart is medial to my fingers. Now, if it is on the midline, we can also use the term median. My heart is a median organ, even though it is medial to my fingers. Yeah. The medial lateral description talks about the left versus right components. Other things to consider: bilateral, so meaning two sides. Bilateral means that it's one on each side. It is present on each side. My hands are generally bilateral structures. Yeah. Ipsilateral, ipsi meaning same, it means same side. Yeah. If I hold my right hand up, I can say that my liver is on the ipsilateral side of my right hand. Yeah. Because my right hand is my right side and my liver is on the right side. Contralateral, contra meaning opposite, means opposite side. So my liver is contralateral to my left hand because my liver is a right-sided organ and my left hand is on the left side. If something's close to you, it is proximal. If it is far, it is distal. My heart is proximal compared to, now let's say this. As I move from my hand to my shoulder, I move proximally. As I move from my shoulder to my hand, I move distally. Distal is also further away from the trunk, right? My hand is distal to the heart. Things in the trunk is proximal, so my heart is proximal to my hand. Compared to my hand, I should say. Superficial and peripheral. That is near the surface or the outside. So if something is on the outside, it is superficial, right? Because superficial people aren't very deep. And it's also peripheral, yeah? Central would be the opposite. Central would be the insides. The peripheral would be towards the outer portion. It's away from. Distal is peripheral. Superficial is also generally distal. Deep is going to be the opposite. It's the internal things. My heart is deep to my skin. My skin is superficial or peripheral to my heart. So breaking things down here, we have the left, we have the right. Moving away from the midline or median would be lateral. Towards it is medial. If we're going up above, we go superior, also sometimes known as cranial. And if we go below or down in relationship, we call it inferior, sometimes known as caudal. If we go to the front, it's anterior. If it's on the front, it's ventral. If we go to the back, it's posterior. If it's on the back, it is dorsal. If it is close to us, it is proximal. If it is distal, it is far away. If it exists on both sides, it is bilateral. If it exists on the same side as, it is ipsilateral. And if it is on the opposite side of, it is contralateral. Let's talk about the body sections. So the three sections are coronal, transverse, and sagittal. So when we cut the body into pieces, our sagittal cut is cutting our left side and our right side away from each other. Yeah. Longitudinal sections that divide the body into left and right portions. If the section passes along the midline and divides it into equal parts, it is a median or mid-sagittal cut. If it is a section that is lateral to the midline, it is parasagittal. This is true in all of these sections. If it is mid or median, it is a mid-transverse, a mid-coronal, a mid-sagittal cut. If it is off to the side, it is a para cut. It is a parasagittal, paratransverse, and paracoronal cut. Transverse now is if I cut the body between superior and inferior, if I bisect the body at the hip. Frontal is if I cut the face off, if I divide between anterior and posterior portions. Yeah? Sagittal, vertical cut, transverse, horizontal cut. Coronal is a cut that divides the front and the back. When we look at these are examples of CT scans, yeah? So we can see the different layers that we can peel through. When we talk about cylindrical organs, it gets a little bit different. We don't use sagittal, transverse, and frontal. When an organ is shaped like a cylinder, we use different terminology. We use cross-section, oblique section, longitudinal section. Here's what I want you to know. Cross-section cuts it along the skinny part. Longitudinal section cuts it along the long section. Oblique is a weird word. It cuts it at a weird angle. It cuts at an angular angle. So in A, we have a cross-section cut. B, we have an oblique cut. And C, we have a longitudinal cut. This is a bone in this example. All right, abdominal areas. This is the 9-point region. Yeah? So, talked about this in class. Gastric is stomach. It's a Latin word for stomach. Epigastric is above. So, stomach, it's in the middle of your body. It's the middle above portion when we're talking about the 9 regions. Left and right hypochondric is to the sides of epigastric, right? Hypochondriac. So hypochondriac, I like to say chondro is cartilage. So the chondriac is kind of, if you think below some of the cartilage, so hypochondriac, yeah. So I want you to think of the stomach's in the center. Its flanks are the chondriacs. We have the left and the right hypochondriac sandwiching the epigastric. Umbilical, it's your umbilical cord. Yeah, it's the mid part. There's your umbilical region. On its flanks are the lateral regions. These are your true sides. You have your left and right lateral region. Then, of course, we have the pubic, sometimes the hypogastric. So think the gastrix underneath it, the pubic region. It's the pubic. Yeah, it's the pubic bone. It's the pubic cavity. So we think the pubic region, sometimes the hypogastric. The inguinal regions are on either side, also known as the iliac regions, because the big artery that runs through here off of the descending aorta are iliac arteries, and they pass right through here. So the inguinal is kind of that groin region in the hip, also known as iliac, because the iliac arteries come through here. So if we think of our center point, it's our umbilical region. The center lateral sides are just named that, lateral sides, right and left. Above the umbilical region is our stomach, and above that is the epigastric. So we just call this the epigastric region. Underneath that is cartilage on each side, so we call it the hypochondriac region. Then we have the pelvic or pubic region, also known as the hypogastric region, and that gives us our inguinal regions, because this is the inguinal area. The inguinal canal connects here, and the iliac arteries also go through here, so it can also be called the iliac region. When we divide it into quadrants, super easy, not rocket science. We have upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. It is that simple. This is just something you can look at. These are a bunch of different Latin terms for body regions. Yeah, there are a lot of different Latin terms for different body regions. Knowing these will help you with different conditions down the road. We know that the wrist is known as the carpal, right? The carpal bones. So carpal tunnel is formed by those bones in a concentric ring. Problems with collapse in that region is therefore carpal tunnel syndrome. Yeah. Antebrachial is the forearm. Brachial is the arm. So antebrachial is opposite of the arm, is the forearm. Antecubital. The cubital is the back of the elbow. So the antecubital is the opposite of the back. So it's the front of the elbow. Again, knowing all of these terms is going to be helpful when we're talking about anatomy as we go more into like the skeletal system especially, right? We can see here we have the head, also known as cephalic. And I don't think, did they put caudal in here? No, I don't think so. Okay, so that basically brings us to the end of lecture 1. Like I said, I wanted this to be more of a run through of the notes as they are written with some extra context and examples. I hope I did a decent job beating you over the head with the homeostasis and thermoregulation. When we meet up for our next class, we will not be going through all of the lecture for the end of module 1 that we missed, since a lot of that was what we worked on day 1. So have this watched, and then when we come into class this week, we're going to be starting module 2's lecture. I'm going to try and have that video up for you guys by tomorrow night, which will be Wednesday at this point. Try your best to take a look at it. If you don't get to it, that's totally fine. I will have module 3 up this weekend so that moving forward, you can watch the video prior to the lecture and come in with your questions. I hope that helped. Yeah, use this as a reference back to better understand things that you might have questions for. But of course, feel free to reach out and ask me any questions that you have. All right, thanks.